All right, as you can see, Jon Anik is here. UFC 302 just around the corner, going down in the Northeast, Newark, New Jersey. A couple of big ones at the top of the card, including a championship fight in, at least in my opinion, the toughest division in all of MMA, one of the toughest divisions in all of sports. The lightweight title on the line between Islam Makhachev and Dustin Poirier. We're going to talk all about that much more. Jon, how are you, my man?
I mean, what's tougher, the AFC East or the UFC lightweight division? You and I have been aligned on this for a long time, and it's not just my Kenny Florian bias. The UFC's 155-pound division has always been the most ruthless, or consistently in that conversation. There was a time when the UFC's bantamweight division was not in that conversation. That conversation has never been had without 155. So I digress.
Yeah, look, I know people like to be hipsters and say bantamweight, and bantamweight's fun, but it's not lightweight. It just isn't lightweight. And that'll be on display June 1st in Newark, New Jersey. But I know you're always excited to call the action. But before we get to that, I have to say, seeing you tweet that you're breaking golf clubs in preparation for a golf tournament made me pop a little bit. Patrick Mahomes, I believe, was putting on this tournament. I believe you were playing with Justin Gaethje from what I read. How did that go? And did the rest of your clubs remain intact during said tournament?
Well, thankfully, we were able to get that Titleist DCI 6-iron reshafted before the 15 in the Mahomes, Patrick Mahomes charity golf tournament at the beautiful Shadow Creek Golf Course in Las Vegas. I didn't play particularly well, but what I will tell you, number one, I showed up thinking I was going to be like playing with NFL players, and I showed up, realized I was the celebrity in the foursome, right? So that people were paying, I should say, to play with me. So probably not a great draw, but we had a great time. And certainly I tried to make up for it with personality and energy, even if I did not have the star power that they would have been looking for. But when I'm sitting over a putt, Michael, and I'm playing by myself, I'm just looking to get to the next fucking tee box. When I'm putting for a team, it's a different ball game. So I had a little bit more focus. I had a little bit more alcohol coursing through my veins, and I actually think that might be a performance enhancer for me out there. So it was great. It was great to be invited. And last thing I'll say, bro, there was a silent auction, and I bid on a Jamar Chase Cincinnati Bengals helmet, in part because I like Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. I have family who are Cincinnati Bengals season ticket holders, but I also bid to be participatory and to show that I was involved, right? But what I failed to realize was at a Kansas City Chiefs event, nobody else was going to bid on the Cincinnati Bengals helmet. So we also, for $1,230 or so, got the Jamar Chase helmet. So it was a great weekend, and got to keep the golf clubs intact.
Yes, well, thank you for sharing that. The action heading to Newark to kick off the month of June. Jon Anik, Islam Makhachev defending his lightweight title against Dustin Poirier in the main event. And Jon, as someone who gets how this sport works like yourself, but you also are a believer in meritocracy, this one is a prime example of the mantra that I have believed in when it comes to the UFC and title shots over the last, I would say, 18 months or so, more so in 2024. Availability is your best friend. And after Poirier knocked out Benoit Saint-Denis and the buzz he got from it and the timing of the two big lightweight fights at UFC 300, this one, at least from a reactionary standpoint, this one didn't feel egregious at all. In fact, the reaction from most fans, I didn't see a lot of negativity with this one at all compared to similar bookings. Did you notice that as well?
Yeah, I think that's a fair reaction and assessment. Let me just say, though, off the top, if Justin Gaethje goes to his Bank of America app on his phone today, I think that's going to make him feel pretty good. But I feel pretty badly for that guy who hasn't realized undisputed UFC gold, and by virtue of his knockout of Dustin Poirier, we thought had put himself in position. So the history, the fight against Max Holloway is what it is. But if anybody deserves sort of a body of work type title shot, and that's not to discredit what Dustin Poirier just accomplished against Benoit Saint-Denis to get back in that green column, but if anybody was worthy of a title fight just based on history and a body of work, it is Dustin Poirier. But you're so right in terms of leading the dance with availability. And if you want to take it a step further, if I'm Arman Tsarukyan, and I know health is wealth, but all of these guys thinking about what's Islam's calendar, right? Because a lot of these champions, they may not control the opposition, but they sure do control the calendar. And we knew Islam was going to be fighting on June 1st in Newark, New Jersey. And Dustin Poirier is making the quick turn. We'll see how it goes for him here in a few days.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Arman Tsarukyan, because as the driver of his hype train for many, many years, I totally understand why he wanted to wait, and good on him, because he's aware of the calendar as well. He could wait till October and fight the winner of this fight in Abu Dhabi, especially if it's Islam Makhachev. And that's like, of all the fights that I want to see right now, Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan 2 full training camps is probably, it may not be at the very, very top of the list, but it's certainly up there. But Poirier in this spot, the storylines that have come from this ever since this fight was announced, the what ifs that has come from this fight since it was announced. The only other fight that comes to mind that's similar to this, and it certainly didn't have the same amount of time to build and grow as this one, was when Michael Bisping stepped in on short notice and fought at UFC 199. As someone who has called some wild and unexpected moments as you have, how do you view the what ifs of this fight, especially on the Dustin Poirier side of things, if he can actually pull this off?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure I can get there with you on that analogy. Now, I do believe that I was in that camp of those who felt like Luke Rockhold was going to go down as one of the greatest middleweight champions of all time. So I don't at all want to sort of, suggest that Luke Rockhold's skill for skill on his best night wouldn't compare to someone like Dustin Poirier, who is a future UFC Hall of Famer. But gosh, man, I really feel like Dustin Poirier, when he's aligned between the ears, is a really difficult guy to beat. Yeah, there are tough stylistic matchups for him. Kenny Florian and I just recently went back and watched his fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov, and I think there's a lot of good real estate and film in there for Dustin to work with going into this particular challenge. But I just believe that Islam Makhachev isn't even quite on a high enough pedestal yet in terms of what he has accomplished and just how relatively young he is as far as this era is concerned, right? Khabib Nurmagomedov finished his UFC career 13-0. This dude's trying to win a 14th straight UFC fight coming up on June 1st, and yet he hasn't defended the belt against a true lightweight just yet. So it's going to take Dustin Poirier's best. I do like him in this active competition cycle. I just loved everything about that Saint-Denis training camp and fight week, even when it comes to the shaved fucking head, right? And people can say that's intangible, and I'm overstating that. You think he's going to grow out his hair for the Makhachev fight? I certainly hope not. He better go back with the short lettuce. And if he's already grown out his hair, that is not a good sign, Mike. That is not a good sign.
Yeah, I completely agree with you with how people view Islam Makhachev, and they talk about the resume and sort of the build. And I think a lot of people don't realize that Islam has essentially fought the dudes that he needed to fight, and that he was booked against top 5 guys. And then for one reason or another, those guys couldn't make it. So he just stayed on the card and fought whoever the UFC gave them. That's not his fault. And he got to the position he's in right now because he's freaking good and he's an absolute monster. And he's the best damn fighter in the world right now. I've had him as the best fighter in the world for well over a year now. And it's been an interesting title run, though, when you look at it, because you have the 2 Volkanovski fights, and now you have Dustin Poirier. And we just sort of spoke about the talk of this fight is, what if Dustin can actually pull this off? What if Dustin can check this final box off in this Hall of Fame career of his? So what I think on the Makhachev side, do you feel like he comes in with less pressure because everybody's talking about Dustin and whether or not he can do this? Or do you think he has more pressure to go out there and dominate June 1st with everything he's trying to build?
I think he is able to eat and digest pressure as well as any UFC champion. So I truly do not worry about Islam Makhachev. Now, you got to be like Floyd Mayweather. You can never be flat on fight night. You have to always be at your best, because if you are not, you can be knocked unconscious by Dustin Poirier. But when I think about my pay-per-view open, right, and when I think about even Bilal Muhammad and Leon Edwards, what exactly is the story in that one? Steve Erceg and Alexandre Pantoja, we went with an Erceg-themed pay-per-view open, and that is my decision to write that copy. The Dustin Poirier pay-per-view open writes itself, right? Last chance, look what he just did against Saint-Denis, future UFC Hall of Famer, whichever angle you want to take on the Poirier side, the pay-per-view open writes itself. But for Islam Makhachev, first fight against Alexander Volkanovski, a lot of people thought Volk won. I sat there octagon side. I didn't think the outcome was in question at all. I thought maybe, with respect to my dear friend Alexander Volkanovski, that Islam Makhachev had won 4 rounds to 1. He just didn't finish particularly strongly. And then, of course, Volkanovski didn't have the benefit of a training camp in the rematch, and he's also a featherweight coming in. So I feel like Islam Makhachev hasn't gotten due credit for either of those title defenses. So what does Amanda do when he crafts a pay-per-view open? I think I might try to tie them both together, but I do believe Islam Makhachev has a great chance to go down as one of the all-time greats, and I think he's excited, Mike, just to have the chance to defend the belt against one of these divisionally big names like Dustin Poirier or Justin Gaethje.
But what if Dustin does do this, John? Because on paper, this is a freaking nightmare matchup for him. But we felt that way about Bisping fighting Rockhold because we saw them fight before and Rockhold kind of dusted him up. And then Sarah GSP, we felt that way about Sean Strickland fighting Israel Adesanya in a lot of respects. That's what a lot of the pundits were saying. Like, Sean's going to go in there and fight, but he's just going to get thumped up by Izzy. And then we saw what happened in Australia that night. And there's many other examples like this. But if Dustin goes out there and pulls this off, and he just said in a recent interview, he's got to leave Islam Makhachev unconscious, and the referee's going to have to pull him off, and they're going to wrap the title around his waist. And I know how much you respect and admire Dustin, what he's done over the years in and out of the octagon. Where will this rank for you in, I guess, storyline cappers? Does it surpass Bisping winning a world title at UFC 199 in terms of, I know it's a cliche term now, but a guy going out there and finishing his story?
It's a great question. Michael Bisping would have been a UFC Hall of Famer whether or not he knocked out Luke Rockhold on that fateful night. And the same thing applies to Dustin Poirier. And going into the Benoit Saint-Denis fight, I don't know if I said it with you or not, but I said if there is any legacy on paper right now in the UFC that really doesn't need an undisputed championship, it's Dustin Poirier's legacy. So, yeah, I mean, he's fighting for that ultimate capstone, and I guess maybe he's fighting for all-time great status, if not Mount Rushmore status, right? But it's just been an incredible run from the Fightville documentary, from all of his avid fans that he's rewarded over the years. You're right in terms of the matchup on paper. I just like the timing of the fight for Poirier. I like the quick turn. I like the confidence accrued from the Benoit Saint-Denis fight. I like the fact that the fight's in the time zone in which he resides. You know, I understand why my twin brother just walked out the door and was like, I like Dustin Poirier to win the fight, by the way. You know, as his dear friend Bilal Muhammad trains alongside Islam Makhachev in New Jersey right now. But yeah, I can see why people see Dustin Poirier as a live underdog and like him in this particular spot. But my goodness, man, even just going back and watching film on Islam Makhachev, I'm like, man, just look at this guy. Just look at this guy. In every realm of mixed martial arts, and then just the physical aesthetic at the beginning of the fight. He's an absolute monster, and as said previously, I think it's going to take Dustin best, and he's certainly capable of that.
I'll put you on the spot here, and I know out the hindsight of a fighter meeting that hasn't happened yet, this is kind of a tough question for you to answer, but what's your gut telling you? Do you feel like no matter what happens June 1st, this could be the last time we see Dustin Poirier?
I don't think so. I don't know. I mean, he certainly has financial freedom, even beyond, I think, what he thought he could acquire, right? Hot sauce and a couple of late career McGregor fights, obviously. So he's not prize fighting at this point in time. The legacy is secured. But I also feel like when Ronda Rousey lost to Holly Holm, I said, you know, you're walking into your new life when you get home. And for a retiring athlete, even if you don't go out on a particularly good note or bad note, you're walking into your new life. And Matt Brown is dealing with that very reality right now. And I just don't know that Dustin wants to get to that expiration date just yet. I think he just enjoys making that walk, you know, unlike a George St. Pierre, too much. So I don't think this is going to be the final walk. And, you know, I wouldn't be surprised to see some celebration type tour, not unlike, I don't even want to invoke the name Derek Jeter. I prefer the athletes who retire spontaneously, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a build up for Dustin Poirier's final fight, whenever that may be.
Well, before that fight happens, Sean Strickland is back for the first time since losing the middleweight title in January to Dricus du Plessis. Another 5-rounder. He'll fight Paulo Costa, who may have lost to Robert Whittaker earlier this year, but he put up one hell of an effort, and it sort of begins this fun little 3-week little middleweight Grand Prix of sorts with this fight. Then we have Cannonier Nemavov, and then 5 rounds with Whittaker and Khamzat Chimaev as well. This is a big one at 185, considering what's going on right now. We expect Dricus du Plessis to fight Israel Adesanya sometime later this year, but who's going to be next? We're going to find out over the next 3 weeks.
Middleweight division is absolutely fascinating right now, and not unlike the bantamweight division that is owned by Sean O'Malley. I think there are a lot of middleweights, contenders, who believe that the champion is a beatable guy, and we shall see, right? Certainly Sean Strickland went toe-to-toe with him, but this fight is enormous, and Sean Strickland is right there. Certainly this fight has me almost too excited to analyze. I did crunch some numbers on Paulo Costa. When he made his UFC debut in 2017, he fought 3 times. Fought once in 2018, once in 2019, once in 2020, once in 2021, once in 2022. He didn't fight at all in 2023. And now we're getting him twice before June 2nd, 2024. So that's the most encouraging sign for me. And the time has got to be now. He's 33 years of age. He's getting his shot not only at the number 1 contender in Sean Strickland, but also a guy who a lot of people think still deserves to have the belt rested around his waist. So even though Paulo Costa is coming off a loss to Robert Whittaker, he's in a great position to establish himself as a top title contender. I just want to see Costa be more urgent, and it remains to be seen as to whether or not this matchup affords him the opportunity to do just that. Yeah, he's got 5 rounds instead of 3, which I guess is encouraging, but, it sounds trite, but the time has got to be now for Paulo Costa. He's got to go out and seize the day and really try to get a finish, and of course that's easier said than done against Sean Strickland. And I give Sean credit too, right, because Sean could have played the waiting game and ended up fighting DDP in a rematch, or even fought the winner of DDP Adesanya, if that indeed is the fight that they make in Perth, Western Australia. So I give Strickland credit, as I have repeatedly, for stepping up for the promotion and making a big fight here, a 5-round co-main event. A lot of athletes are reluctant to sign on the dotted line for a 5-rounder. So it's a huge fight, bro, an absolutely huge fight. And we'll see how it plays out in Newark, New Jersey. Normally I get the betting lines for you in front of this exercise. I don't know on that one. I'd imagine it's pretty close.
Yeah. It's really interesting to go back and look at how the majority of the fan base viewed both of these guys 3 or so years ago, because Costa was always kind of popular, but then he had the whole Marvin Vettori thing where he was just like, I ain't going to cut weight. And they moved the fight to 205 and like everything happened there. And when it comes to Sean Strickland, I was talking to Eric Nixick a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him about the moment he realized that Sean Strickland wasn't just popular, but it hit him that Sean was actually a superstar. And he said it took him all the way to January in Toronto. It's UFC 297 fight week. And he's walking around with Sean and Chris Curtis. And a fan yells, "Sean, tell me what to think." And then Chris sort of lost his mind. And Eric thought it was like the funniest thing ever. But that was the moment he truly realized how popular Sean Strickland is right now, especially since Sean was the guy 3 or so years ago. Fans would eye roll about headlining at the Apex because he wasn't, quote unquote, an exciting fighter. I don't know if I remember such a seismic shift in popularity from like 0 to 100 so quickly like this, but he's certainly done it, hasn't he, John? It's crazy.
Oh my goodness. I'm sure the merchandise is flying off the shelves. And if you are somebody out there who really genuinely does not think that Sean Strickland is, say, a top 10 UFC superstar right now, let us know as to why on social media. Now, my memory and recall isn't as good as like Joe Rogan's or Kenny Florian's, right? But what I remember about Sean Strickland is us sort of championing his cause as a 17-1 fighter and an 18-1 fighter. And certainly he was doing a lot of his work as a UFC welterweight, but I felt like he was criminally underappreciated just for having one of these shoddy MMA records like Dominic Cruz for all of these years. So that's what I remember about Sean Strickland. But certainly I think Chael Sonnen is a guy who at times didn't let his personality go. And it's crazy to think there was actually a time when Sean Strickland would check or cloak his personality. He's let it go. He's become a massive superstar. And of course that is dovetailed with his excellence inside the octagon. So yeah, he's a super big deal. And I think it stands to reason that Sean Strickland's going to be the guy who pushed a lot of tickets in Newark, New Jersey. So, hopefully he knows just how many needles he's moving.
Do you feel like Khamzat's in the driver's seat here when it comes to this? Because I know when Dana announced Khamzat versus Whittaker, he said it's a number 1 contender fight. But at the same token, if Sean Strickland just goes out and just thumps up Paulo Costa, something real, and that's like the big headline stealing moment of 302, it's kind of hard to argue with his popularity that he should be the guy right now. So do you feel like Khamzat is in the driver's seat and we have to wait till June 22nd to kind of figure this out? Or do you feel like Sean can get a huge head start on June 1st?
Good question. Certainly can get a head start, and performing and finishing a high-level guy like Paulo Costa is going to put you in prime position. By the way, Sean Strickland about a 2-1 favorite right now on DraftKings Sportsbook over Paulo Costa, if you are curious. But yeah, I do think Khamzat Chimaev has the inside lane, and he's a guy who became the number one contender at welterweight, but didn't seemingly feel like making that weight anymore. I do believe that Chimaev has the inside lane, but he has a Herculean challenge, or so it would seem, in front of him against Robert Whittaker June 22nd. And if we circle back to what we were talking about, Islam Makhachev in the calendar, availability reigns supreme. And at least as we sit here right now, August is fast approaching, and we don't necessarily have a main event for Perth, Western Australia. So is Dricus du Plessis going to be fighting in December against somebody like Sean Strickland, Khamzat Chimaev, or is he going to fight sooner against a seemingly healthy and available Israel Adesanya? I don't know the answer to that question. But I do believe that, and rush is the wrong verb. Push is probably the wrong verb. I think they want to feature Khamzat Chimaev at a championship setting. And as the lead play-by-play guy, I agree with that. The guy is absolutely electric, substance, style. And, I think he's put enough of a body of work on paper to, if he beats Whittaker, bro, I mean, nobody could argue in a meritocracy anyway. So, yeah, I'd like to see Chimaev get a title shot.
There's going to be a 30 for 30 on Khamzat Chimaev someday, and I'm just going to watch it and just be enthralled by it all, because he's been the biggest mystery in the sport right now. The number one contender in 2 divisions, and we're just wondering when he's going to fight and where is he and everything that's going on. So next 3 weeks are going to be super fascinating. Speaking of middleweight, Kevin Holland back at middleweight against Mikhail Oleksiejczuk. Jailton Almeida back against Alexander Romanov. Big one at heavyweight. Randy Brown, speaking of underrated, he's pretty underrated at 170 right now, taking on Elizeu Zaleski. And then we have the return of Mickey Gall. We have Grant Dawson versus Joe Selecki. Roman Kopylov versus Cesar Almeida. Mitch Raposo is making his UFC debut on this card. What's sort of the low-key storyline for you that not a lot of people are talking about here?
Well, it's not the Fall River, Massachusetts native Mitch Raposo making his UFC debut, but shout out to good old Mitch, who is finishing people regionally to work his way into the UFC. A lot of different things. Thematically, I would say Grant Dawson and Roman Kopylov on the prelims. How did they respond from not surprising losses on both sides necessarily? Anthony Fluffy Hernandez is a real problem, but there were a lot of people who sort of, were hanging their hat on Kopylov. So how does he respond in the feature prelim there against Cesar Almeida? Yeah, Randy Brown, I feel like the Jack Della Maddalena fight, that little Perth hiccup, was probably a blessing in disguise, even though he was reluctant to make that trip. He's won 2 straight now again and 6 of 7. Kevin Holland, if I'm Jim Miller, right, I'm worried a little bit about Kevin Holland. Because 21 UFC fights in 5+ years. And I do like this fight with Michal Oleksiejczuk, the 29-year-old out of Poland who has accrued a lot of high-level UFC experience. Polish guy usually loses to the guys who on paper are favored to beat him. And I'd imagine Kevin Holland is favored here. But yeah, Holland's had a couple of difficult fights against guys that he maybe is just one level below, and I'm sure he would take issue with me saying that. So seemingly a more winnable fight here for Kevin Holland. It's in the middleweight division, but I really like Kevin Holland, man. I really appreciate the body of work, and I just want to see him go for it in this matchup, and I think in this prime slot in a feature bout on pay-per-view, he will.
Yeah, Kevin Holland, and I feel like him and Derek Lewis are sort of in the same category where it's almost like rankings don't matter. You just want to see him. You just want to see him on fight week. You want to see him with the microphone in his face. And with a guy like Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, there's no way that fight's going to stink. There's just no way. Oleksiejczuk is such a get-got guy in a lot of respects. And Kevin just loves that stuff, and he'll get right after it and talk a little trash. There's no way that fight's terrible.
Well, and I'm interested to see Kevin Holland long-term in the weight class that he desires to be in. And he did a lot of winning at welterweight, and I think that necessitated him staying there. Promotionally, they wanted him there. But, if a dude wants to smoke weed and eat and fight at 86, right, he's answered a lot of calls for the UFC, right? I think back to Noche UFC. There was a lot of Mexican fanfare that week, and rightfully so, but oftentimes the loudest ovations were reserved for Kevin Holland, and seemingly he was the guy who was pushing tickets, so shout out to Kevin Holland.
I brought up Derek Lewis. The UFC is just on fire right now, Jon Anik. It doesn't make a lot of, it makes sense, but it almost doesn't in some way, because I got to be honest with you. You and I, we got a relationship going on. When they announced Derek Lewis versus Rodrigo Nascimento as the main event for UFC St. Louis, I was like, what are we doing here? What is this? Because my first reaction was, if you're in St. Louis, like, don't buy tickets. Like, you deserve better than this? But then the more I thought about it, I was like, you know what? If you do buy tickets, then that means we might be able to get out of the Apex, because if you buy tickets for this, you're probably going to buy tickets for pretty much anything. And then they have the biggest gate and fight night history with that fight as the main event. And the card was fun as hell. So I don't want to take anything away from the fighters, but it's just crazy how on fire you guys are right now. You could go anywhere with any fights and people are going to buy tickets and eat it up. How crazy is this?
Oh, look no further than the watch parties with you and Conor. I mean, you guys just going bananas, right? Like, I think we all recognize that an early UFC prelim at this point in time is better than like a regular season NBA game. But this sport's ability to deliver unpredictable theater is just insane. Right? Like, true horseshoe up the ass moment at UFC 300, right? At the end of that BMF title fight. Like, you couldn't have drawn it up any better, you know? Like, God must be a UFC fan or on the UFC's side is what I'm thinking in that particular moment. But yeah, man, it's been an incredible run. And it's crazy to think divisionally how many things are going to change over the next several months. It's crazy to think that Conor McGregor is back for UFC 303. It's just a great time to be in mixed martial arts. And, you know, I know sometimes you and I sort of have the head down, hitting the pavement, but, and the live events can run just one right into the next, you know, but, it's a pretty special time to be a UFC fan right now. And I will say, in terms of the St. Louis show, I don't always know what goes into what determines a main event. You know, they headline the ladies a lot. They headline the heavyweights a lot. Certainly this one worked out at the box office to the nth degree. You know, you and I, in terms of our avid MMA fandom, might be like, dude, like Joaquin Buckley, man, give him the St. Louis showcase. Maybe his opponent didn't have a big enough name, you know, but I do think that heavyweights still move the needle for some pocket of this fan base, you know, and certainly Derek the Black Beast Lewis walking out as the last man, you know, I can understand it. But yeah, I mean, oftentimes in fighter meetings, we talk to guys like Anthony Fluffy Hernandez about getting that UFC main event. And, you know, for Chris Curtis, he had to take his on short notice to get it. I just would like to see as many of these athletes in the deepest divisions, right? 55, 70, headline, right? Because that is the greatest showcase of mixed martial arts with respect to Rodrigo Nascimento.
Yeah. Well said. Much appreciated. Yeah, you mentioned Conor McGregor's coming back. Like, you're going to get Islam Dustin at the beginning of the month, and then you're getting Conor Chandler at the end of the month. It's been a long time since we're preparing for a Conor McGregor fight inside the octagon. Does it, as a guy in your spot, does it just feel bigger right now? I mean, we talked about how on fire the product is right now, but it's a whole different ballgame when Conor McGregor's a part of things.
There's no doubt. I mean, I have no choice but to go day by day, show by show. I know I invoked Conor McGregor's name right there, but some months I might have one live event. In June, I have 3. I'll go straight from Saudi Arabia to Las Vegas, and then we have the UFC Hall of Fame ceremony 2 days before Conor McGregor fights. So I'm getting anxious as I sort of think about the month of June in totality. But there's only one thing bigger than UFC 300 with respect, right? UFC 400 is going to be in 2032. Long time from now. There's only one thing bigger than UFC 100, 200, 300, 400, and that's Conor McGregor fighting, and that's our reality June 29th. So yeah, it's a big deal, man. You know, and I'm just curious to see how he performs. Right? Obviously, it's a intriguing fight. It's a close fight on paper. You know, Conor McGregor is a little bit enigmatic, a little bit of a lesser known commodity at this stage of his career, but I've always said that he has a huge appetite for mixed martial arts competition, for putting more MMA scalps on his resume so as to maximize the enjoyment of his retirement. And, you know, people are going to make their judgments, but I really do feel like that broken leg it really just threw a wrench into everything that he was hoping the second wind of his UFC career would be. So I'm hoping for more beyond this. Like, I'm excited for June 29th, but only if we get him once more in 2024. Because, you know, the one-offs are not what I'm interested in. I'm interested to see if one of the greatest of all time, in my mind, on his best nights, can and wants to do that again, and I think he does. So we'll see.
Said he wants to fight 3 times this year. So, but obviously there's a business portion of this whole thing. He's got 2 fights left on his deal. After fights Chandler, he have 1 fight left on his deal. So hopefully he resigns and we get much more Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor free agency would be friggin' fascinating as hell. But that brings me to some big announcements, John. breaking news as of last week. You actually, in a lot of people's eyes, broke this news. Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad 2, the rematch happening in Manchester. UFC 304, Tommy Aspinall, Curtis Blades, interim title fight, Paddy Pimblett, Bobby Green. Dana announced 5 fights. 2 of them we had already confirmed ahead of time, but those 3 in particular, now that they're on the books, super interesting. But Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad 2, look, you could say what you want about availability being your best friend and this guy's a bigger star than this guy. It doesn't matter. If there's anybody, Merab Dvalishvili and Bilal Muhammad are 2 guys that 100% earned their opportunity to fight for the belts. And if they got passed over for any reason, it's kind of BS. But now Bilal gets his shot. Your reaction to all of these fights and Leon Bilal too?
Well, I'm certainly happy for Bilal Muhammad, right? But those who suggest that he was passed over at UFC 300 do need to recognize that for guys like Alexandre Pantoja and Bilal Muhammad, sometimes you win the fight that earns you a title fight. You maybe even get it guaranteed in the case of Bilal Muhammad by the boss, but you might have to wait a year and a half, if not 2 years, to realize that championship opportunity. I can understand why for an event like UFC 300, they wanted somebody like a Shavkat Rakhmonov or a Khamzat Chimaev alongside Leon Edwards in order to make that fight. And the result would have been that whoever the welterweight champion was 6 months later would have defended against Bilal Muhammad. So I always believed that Dana was going to do right by Bilal because his candidacy was impossible to ignore. Even Jack Della Maddalena and Shavkat Rakhmonov would acknowledge Bilal publicly, right? And those were the guys who were right on the cusp of a title fight. So thrilled for him. Thrilled he's getting the opportunity. Really tough matchup in Leon Edwards, and getting it in the middle of the night in Manchester obviously makes it, I think, even more difficult. But I think if anybody mentally and emotionally can deal with all of that, it is Bilal Muhammad. You know, these interim championship title defenses are rare, but I think right now, just where we're at, given all the factors, it has to happen for Tom Aspinall. I think it's so interesting that we have the consensus greatest of all time in Jon Jones. And then a guy in Tom Aspinall that a lot of the analytical minds that I trust suggest could go down as the greatest heavyweight of all time. And yet for all of the UFC's greatness, there's just no way we're going to be able to put that fight together. So it is what it is. Respect to Stipe Miocic. I wish I could get a betting line on Jon Jones, Tom Aspinall. Never happening, right? Because even in a scenario in which somehow Stipe, God love him, got hurt preparing for November and Jon Jones, right? You think Jon Jones lets Tommy Aspinall step in there on 3 weeks' notice? With total respect to the GOAT, he just doesn't seem to have an appetite for that fight, and I respect it, But I don't think that even in a short notice situation when Aspinall is the obvious guy with no training camp, I'm not sure that Jones is going to afford him that opportunity, and I hope that, me saying that doesn't piss anybody off. It's just how I feel as a fan.
So we were talking about this on my shows the other day, and I wanted to get your gauge on it. Like right this second, if the MMA genies came to you, John, and said, hey, I'm going to give you 2 options and you make it, we're going to make it happen no matter what the situation is. Would you do Jon Jones versus Francis, or would you do Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall?
Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall.
It's crazy how things change in a year, right?
Yeah. I have a healthy appetite for Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou, but it's just much more of a long-term MMA outlook, right? Aspinall, BJJ. We're mixed martial arts here. This is not boxing. No, I know. I love Francis. I love Nixick, all those guys. And I don't know, man. Like when Michael Bisping gets on a hot microphone and says what he says about Tom Aspinall, superlatively, he's not doing it because they're friends, He's doing it because he believes that guy is him. And Curtis Blades might have something to say about that July 27th. Really
looking forward to that one. Paddy Pimblett, Bobby Green's a banger. There's so much to get excited about. I wouldn't sign
to fight Bobby Green right now. Like if I'm a lightweight, I just wouldn't do it. He's too confident right now. Too fast.
He's feeling
too
himself.
Unpredictable. Too confident.
Yeah.
Paddy Pimblett just had twins. So.
Yes. Oh, yes. You factor in the dad stuff, makes you a totally different fighter.
Yeah, it can go
so
one
I'm really
of two
looking
ways.
forward to that.
The dad thing can go one of 2 ways. Even for me as a non-fighter, I had my kids in Jacksonville, Florida, octagon side for the first time. They've sat in the stands before, but all 3 of my kids octagon side. Yeah, I don't want that distraction anymore. I had them at a different hotel, but I would never have them octagon side. It's just too much of an emotional distraction. So Pimblett could channel that in the right way. Obviously, they're newborns, but I don't know. I feel like there's a fierceness about fighting that doesn't dovetail with like procreation and having a bunch of kids around.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to look forward to, John. It's a very exciting time. I know June is going to be an incredibly busy month for you, and that's why I'm glad we're able to do this now and give you the chance to travel the world, John, and see all these different places and call all these incredible fights. You're a lucky man, and Connor and I, GC and I, look forward to hearing you and DC and Rogan on the broadcast of UFC 302 and perhaps calling one of the craziest moments in the history of the sport or not. Either way, it's going to be fun as hell, John, and we appreciate your time as always.
Always a pleasure, buddy. Yeah, it seems like you guys have the identical reactions to what we do in the broadcast booth, so that's fun for us to see you guys after the fact as well.